Hello and welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name's Kate Armitage and I'm your host for our discussion today. I'm delighted to be joined by Calum Slowther, Managing Director at Engineius. Welcome back to GreenFleet Talks, Calum.
Thanks very much, Kate. Good to be here.
And I see that you've got a new job title. You've been promoted recently.
That's right. Yeah, as of last Monday, I'm now the Managing Director, having been the Commercial Director before.
Great, congratulations.
Thank you.
At the end of this month, the 26th Conference of the Parties, better known as COP26, opens in Glasgow, where the world's leaders will be coming together to agree actions and targets on the long-term goal to become net zero by 2050. Today, Calum and I are discussing the role that transport will play in this global stage and where the UK can take the lead and how Engineius is at the forefront of this transition. So Calum, COP26 is a pivotal moment for world leaders, businesses and communities to come together to establish plans and encourage tangible actions to tackle the climate emergency. What, in your opinion, will make a successful COP26?
Well, I think the key word that you said in your question there was tangible actions, and it's a slightly negative answer, but you could argue that the conference in itself can't be a success. A successful conference will be necessary but not sufficient to have the impact that we need. And the absolutely key thing is that the conference is followed up by tangible actions. I think everyone that's been tracking these conferences and government actions in the past would agree that there's been lots of false dawns, so particularly conferences like Paris, where great things have been agreed, but ultimately they haven't maybe been followed by the actions that are required then to make the impact that those decisions were meant to have. So the absolutely key thing is that there's a successful conference, yes, but then it's followed by tangible actions, as you said in your question. Concrete action, obviously, then isn't the number one thing that we need from the conference. There's a couple of other things, I guess, that we might look out for at the conference to judge whether it's a success or not. And I guess I'd pick up on two. One would be that there's this shift towards climate action becoming mainstream. So it's not seen as something or an issue that is then the preserve of NGOs or certain lobbying groups, but it's just becomes part and parcel of everyday life for everybody. And then secondly, also that there's a switch to the leadership becoming private sector led rather than maybe government led. So decisions on reducing carbon becoming economically sort of rational for companies and individuals. To reduce their carbon, so that you've got the tie of incentives of both financial and environmental, and those two things are really bring it closer to home, a key to sort of track the EV market and the adoption of the EVs. We've got to see those become mainstream, and we've got to see it become economically rational for people to switch. And as soon as we see that, then I think we'll start seeing the concrete action that we need. Great,
and I do think that we are seeing this kind of reaction from businesses and from individuals. They are, people are taking it on board and they are starting to change their behaviour. But I agree with you. COP26, if it's really going to be successful, it has to mark a step change in those things, both for businesses and individuals. So thinking about Engineius, what are you doing within your business and with your employees to support achieving net zero targets?
Well, taking a step back, doing business the right way is something that's a core value of ours, and that we both do business the right way, but equally we're seen to be doing business the right way, and we promote the way that we do things. That's true on the environmental front, but other areas of corporate social responsibility as well. So, for example, looking after our self-employed workers and making sure they've got a better deal than other workers in the gig economy. But just specifically on environmental matters, I guess what we describe ourselves at the moment is as a lower carbon model than maybe the traditional models in the market or our immediate competitors, with just really practical things, making sure that that's the case. So a couple to pick up on would be that we don't use chaser vehicles, which I think we talked about maybe in the last podcast, is something that's common in the industry. So two vehicles or two vans go along the same route to then give the driver a lift home. We don't do that. We rely on public transport. Secondly, we've got a drive first policy, so we drive things wherever we can over transporting it, and the emissions, particularly if you've got EVs, is significantly lower from driving vehicles than transporting them. even though there's still lots of people today transporting EVs when we really should be driving them. And then thirdly, just generally as a company, we're pretty tech-based. We, for example, have offices in city centres, so that we encourage people to be travelling to work by public transport. We work a lot remotely with our distributed workforce across the UK. So they're the things we're currently doing, but we realise we've got to do more. And for us, it's about transferring from where we are now, which is a lower carbon model, to a no carbon model. And so what we're planning, and very much tied in with COP, is that we will shortly be offsetting all of the emissions that we produce as a company. And we're doing that in 2 stages. So number one, we're going to focus on our corporate emissions, if you like. So that's everything to do with overhead activity. So people traveling to and from the offices themselves, and any other emissions that we produce as overhead staff. And then the second section is on tailpipe emissions from the movements themselves. And what we're going to do there is we are going to partner with a company that does the carbon offsetting work. We're going to use a smart sort of calculation, if you like, up front when a customer's placing an order to calculate the carbon that would be emitted by that movement. We're going to display that carbon emission, that carbon footprint, and then we're going to give customers the opportunity to pay to offset that movement. And moreover, we're going to make a contribution to that as well, so that the whole burden doesn't fall on the customer, but we're making a fair contribution to that too.
That's really interesting, Calum, and it feels like it's a really positive stepped process, because you already have a business model that reduces unwanted miles, and where possible you have this drive first policy, which means you're not putting vehicle transporters on the road unnecessarily. You encourage the use of public transport, so you've reduced your business carbon footprint, if you like, as much as possible, and then you're offsetting your own business, but then you're going to roll that out to your customers. Exactly. As well. I'm going to be a bit mean and say you mentioned giving your end customers the opportunity to pay to offset. What's your expectation in terms of businesses? Because if people are doing business with Engineius anyway, they must be on board with this idea that they need to be as environmentally positive as possible. So are you hoping that all of your clients will say, yes, we'll pay that premium, and it can become embedded within your product?
Yeah, we absolutely are hoping that everyone says yes. There's a couple of considerations to make, I guess. The first one is actually that our contribution might well increase over time. And yes, we're going to start with a minority percentage, but if it's successful, as you say, why can that not become 100%? And I think we're prepared as a company for it to go that way. It's certainly something that's important to me. And as you were talking about at the start with my new position, that's exactly the sort of thing that I would like to see us do. And then I guess the other thing to talk about is, even if we do give customers the choice for them to pay rather than us paying, we are anticipating to see a positive reaction and lots of customers to make the choice to pay for that offsetting. I think particularly with the bigger companies in the market that have got increasingly strict agendas on a range of areas, but in particular environmental topics. We've talked to big leasing companies, big dealerships about exactly this idea, and they would be more than keen to see this ultimately wrapped into the price of what we're doing. So that's the direction we're heading, and we've just got to take it in stages.
Okay. Oh, I mean, like you said, I would hope and expect that the big leasing companies and the big OEMs are going to be completely behind this. And it sounds really positive. A slightly different topic. It's anecdotal, but I was talking to someone the other day who is taking delivery of their new Renault Zoe, and it was during the petrol crisis. And the delivery of their electric car had been delayed because the petrol car transporter didn't have fuel.
There we go. They must have been devastated. So
I mean, so for you and for your business, that's a great opportunity to say, that we don't work like that. We could have delivered it.
Yeah, we had to make mass customer communications in the fuel crisis to say that everyone should expect delays as a result of what happened, and we had a very quick, smug reply from an unnamed electric vehicle only company that were quick to remind us that they weren't expecting any delays. So that it was certainly the case. It showed it might hopefully accelerate the transition to electric after what happens.
Yeah. And again, it's just that, you know, your business model just adds more resilience to the supply chain. You know, not only are you doing the right thing in terms of reducing your environmental impact, but actually it's better business as well.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. So one of the key objectives of COP26 is to speed up the uptake of electric vehicles. What is Engineius doing specifically to support that?
So we probably can't influence the decision for people to purchase or take up an electric vehicle in the first place. We can't influence that decision, but what we can do is influence the decision on how they sort of then deliver that vehicle in the first place, or how they manage that vehicle once they've got it. And we see a real range of behaviours amongst our clients today in terms of how they're prepared to particularly deliver and collect electric vehicles versus ICE vehicles. The key one, which we've already talked about, is sort of transporting versus driving electric vehicles, and it still unfortunately is the case that lots of fleets are biased towards just thinking that it's an electric vehicle, therefore it must be transported. There's still a lot of sort of range anxiety in the market, and we really feel like we are doing a range of things to try and help people make that decision that we were talking about earlier, which is basically drive first. So whatever length of movement someone books with us, if it's an electric vehicle, we will still drive it. We don't have any limits on the miles that we will drive. We'll charge that vehicle on route if we need to. So operationally, we're trying to encourage people with our policies to drive, not transport EVs. Secondly, we actually train drivers specifically in the key things relating to EVs. So as part of the driver academy that we have, that the drivers go through when they are coming on board with Engineius, but then whilst they are already on board with Engineius and working with us, how we upskill them. We've got specific modules on electric vehicles, and that's an area that we really need to focus on. So although we've created those materials, we know that the landscape is continually changing, and so is the technology, and we need to make sure that we're always upskilling drivers so that knowledge is as relevant as possible. So we put a lot of focus on that. And then thirdly, and probably most importantly, we play, I would say, an advisory role to some big fleets that are starting to adopt electric vehicles. And some of these things sound very simple, but actually they're really quite important in terms of influencing the decisions that are made. So we were just having a discussion with the utilities company the other day that are going to have a number of thousands rather than hundreds of electric vehicles delivered, and helping them plan out the process for those deliveries. The sort of things we were talking about were the realities of what we can expect for the percentage charge that we're going to receive that vehicle on collection, the percentage they should advise their end users it's going to have on delivery. There's this thing about let's deliver it with 80 or 90 or 100% charge. That's not realistic, and it will lead to delays. Align it more closely with, you say, a quarter of a fuel of tank if it's a petrol or diesel vehicle, and it should be further towards that mark to avoid last minute delays and charging infrastructure not being good right at the point at which that person is taking delivery. The driving versus transporting issue we were talking about, there's some complexities around electric vehicles being particularly heavy, and as a result they actually go into a sort of another weight category, if you like, with transporters. So regulation and cost around that, making sure that they're fully aware of just what that weight means for cost and for practicalities. The allocation and the preparation of the vehicles. So are people actually ready to receive that EV? If it's going to home addresses, have they got their charging points? Who really wants one? There's still some skeptics out there, so it's a surefire way to fail quite quickly to deliver them out to people that aren't ready or don't want them, whereas there's lots of people that do. And then the final thing is about the sort of handover process and the design of that handover. The most successful handovers we see are where you've got the physical handover complemented by virtual or online materials, so that the user has a sort of a reactive way, or a proactive way, I should say, as well as a sort of reactive way of learning about their new vehicle, rather than just relying on the driver at the point of handover, actually giving them the materials that they can refer to in their own time to look at, whether it's about how they charge the vehicle, or how the driving experience works and how it's different to the vehicles they've driven before. We feel like that's got to be backed up after the point of delivery, as well as having our driver talk about that when the vehicle's handed over.
Calum, so often on GreenFleet talks and within GreenFleet, we talk about how important it is that first experience when you first take delivery of the car. You know, if that goes well, then, you know, these things really look after themselves. But if that initial handover is mismanaged, it's you know, has the potential to really put someone off a vehicle and them not want to get back in it again. And I love that you're using drivers who have been trained on electric vehicles, who have driven that vehicle there, probably used public infrastructure to charge the vehicle up to get to the point of delivery. I mean, what better advocates for that handover process than your staff?
Yeah, that's true. And that definitely is true. I guess there's a couple of other thoughts come off the back of that. And one is about the expectations that we have for our drivers on handing over that vehicle. And you're completely right to point out the fact that they've driven the vehicle there. So at a minimum, we'd expect them to be able to demonstrate all of the controls that they've had to use to safely drive that vehicle there. But actually what we find is it's almost sort of better to stick to those basics rather than to try and go too far with the handover. And expect too much almost from someone that ultimately drives a lot of different vehicles and can't be expected to know the full range of capabilities that each different vehicle might have. So we've just started working closely with an OEM that does an awful lot of electric vehicles, and the key word for them is consistency. They're just really keen that each customer of theirs that's bought a vehicle off them has the same experience. So they're not saying give them the wow factor when we hand it over and we're expecting your drivers to do that. What they're asking of us is a consistent experience that they then back up, as we said, with online materials after we've delivered the vehicle.
And it's completely normal. It's just normalized, you know, and the number of new car sales that are plug-in vehicles now is I haven't got the latest figures, but it must be nudging 20%. You know, 1 in every 5 vehicles has a plug, so this is normal. You know, it's going to become more common. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we all need to be adapting to that, and Engineius included.
That's really interesting, Calum. One last question. So all eyes will be on the UK because we are hosting COP26, and I think there will be a specific focus on the UK and its commitment to the delivery of vehicle electrification. What more, if anything, would you say the UK can do to drive the take-up of EV charging infrastructure?
Well, I think there's an awful lot more the UK can do, and I know we like to think of ourselves as leading in the space, and I would probably be a little bit more sceptical than that and say we're not. And we can look at a range of our Northern European neighbours who are doing a lot more in the space to encourage people to take up electric vehicles. And I think there's 2 key things it really comes down to. There's the element of cost, and then there's the element of convenience. So cost, we obviously have got a lot of subsidies in place in the UK already, but they're an awful lot more generous when you look abroad at some of the other some of the other European neighbours that we've got, but also global, you know, countries globally are doing a lot more than the UK is. And that's as a result of, I've got some slightly more outdated stats, which are 2020 rather than 2021. But, you know, you've got countries like Norway at 75%. Plug-in levels and say 45%. In Iceland, the UK is, as you say, between sort of 10 and 20% over the last year. It's going in the right direction, but there's much more we can do to get that percentage up. And the second one, maybe more importantly, is convenience for the end user. So particularly if you look at, say, the number of charging points per 100 kilometres of road, the UK set themselves targets for this. We're at about half of that so far. And also, if you look at the numbers versus, again, European neighbours, we're a long way behind the likes of the Netherlands in particular. So I don't think the sort of what we need to do isn't obviously that complicated. Doing it is probably much more difficult, but those are the 2 sort of key things that I'd pick up on that I think the UK should be focusing on.
Great. Well, I totally agree with you, Calum. It's the infrastructure is an ongoing topic of discussion. Actually, I almost think we're getting it in the ground as fast as we can, but these things take time, and we've maybe been caught out a little bit by the dramatic uptick in plug-in vehicle sales in the last 12 months as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which is great news, and I would say, well, not enough infrastructure. That's a nice problem to have if it means that we've smashed our targets on EVs.
Absolutely.
I'm afraid that is about all we've got time for, Calum. It has been a pleasure talking to you again, and thank you to Engineius for joining GreenFleet Talks.
Not at all. Thanks very much, Kate. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. Great. And thank you for watching. Please tune in to GF365 again soon.